In the town of Windbridge, an old manor sat abandoned at the edge of a forgotten wood. Known as Hallowgate Manor, the estate had a dark history, a place where shadows moved of their own accord and whispers echoed down empty halls. The townsfolk spoke of the ghosts that haunted it. Some were said to be vengeful, others strangely protective. No one knew why the spirits lingered, only that the house was cursed. Every year, a local dare would draw curious souls to the manor. Most fled at the first sign of the supernatural, but on one chilly autumn night, Clara, a young woman with a deep fascination for the paranormal, decided to enter the manor alone. She had heard the stories but believed there must be more to them, an untold truth behind the hauntings. As Clara stepped inside, the air grew cold. The grand foyer, though decayed, retained a certain sinister elegance. Heavy drapes sagged at the windows, and dust floated through the air like ash. She felt eyes on her, invisible and watchful. At first, the spirits appeared as gentle whispers, soft as a lullaby. Clara could hear their faint pleas, voices lost to time, begging for help. They sounded sorrowful, like they had suffered long enough in their spectral prison. But as she ventured deeper, the tone of the house changed. The air grew oppressive, and shadows lengthened unnaturally, slithering across the walls like living things. She heard the creak of unseen feet on the floorboards behind her, but when she turned, no one was there. Clara's heart raced as she felt the presence of something darker. A sudden gust of wind blew out her candle, plunging her into darkness. That's when the first cruel spirit appeared, a woman in tattered clothing, her face twisted with hatred, eyes black as night. Her hollow voice rasped through the darkness. "You shouldn't have come," the ghost hissed. "This place is not for the living." Clara staggered back, but the spirit moved closer, her bony fingers outstretched, reaching for Clara's throat. Cold fear wrapped around her, the ghost's presence suffocating. Clara couldn't breathe. It was as if the air itself had been stolen from her lungs. But before the cruel spirit could strike, a light shimmered in the corner of the room. Another ghost, this one soft and ethereal, emerged from the shadows, a young man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. His presence seemed to calm the air. "Leave her be," he said, his voice firm yet compassionate. The cruel spirit shrieked in rage but recoiled, retreating into the darkness. The kind ghost turned to Clara, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Some of us are bound to this place by rage and torment. Others, we only wish to protect those who wander here." His voice grew softer. "But even I cannot stop them all." Clara could feel the weight of the house pressing down on her again, the darker spirits gathering just beyond her sight. The kind ghost reached out, touching her hand. His touch was cold but somehow reassuring. "You must leave now," he said urgently. "The others will come soon, and I cannot hold them back forever. Go, while you still can." Clara nodded, fear and sadness mingling in her chest. As she turned to leave, she heard the distant sounds of angry whispers growing louder, the cruel spirits awakening once more. She fled through the halls, her heart pounding in her chest, the feeling of invisible hands reaching for her, tugging at her clothes. Finally, she burst through the front door, gasping for air. The night was still, the moon hanging low in the sky. As she looked back at the manor, she saw the kind ghost watching her from the window. He gave her a sad smile before fading into the shadows. But as Clara walked away from Hallowgate Manor, she knew that something lingered, an unfinished story, a dark mystery that hadn't yet been unraveled. She had seen the two sides of the haunting, the cruel spirits, hungry for vengeance, and the kind ones, bound by sorrow. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the tale, more to discover in the depths of that cursed house. And as she left the town behind, the whispers of the ghosts echoed in her mind, calling her back. Perhaps one day she would return to Hallowgate Manor. The ghosts had their secrets, and Clara had a feeling they weren't done with her yet. Weeks passed, but Clara couldn't escape the pull of Hallowgate Manor. The memories of the spirits haunted her dreams, their voices calling to her, imploring her to return. Even in the daylight, she felt their presence, lingering just beyond the veil of reality. She tried to ignore it, bury herself in work, and distract herself with the mundane. But the dreams only grew worse, more vivid. In them, The kind ghost would stand at the edge of a darkened room, whispering her name, his face etched with a deep sadness. The cruel spirits, though unseen, lingered in the shadows, their icy grip clawing at her consciousness. Clara couldn't fight it any longer. She had to return. On a cold, misty night, she packed her belongings, just the essentials, enough for a single night, and drove back to Windbridge. The town seemed deserted, and eerie silence draped over the streets. The townsfolk knew better than to wander near Hallowgate Manor after dark. But Clara was driven by something she couldn't explain, an insatiable need to uncover the truth of what haunted that cursed house. When she arrived at the manor, the air was heavy, thick with a sense of foreboding. The trees around the estate swayed as if whispering warnings, and the wind howled through the empty windows like a distant wail of despair. She hesitated at the door, fear gripping her chest, but something urged her forward. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted. It felt as though the manor itself had been waiting for her. The candle she carried flickered in the dark, casting long shadows across the walls. The house seemed alive, as though it breathed with the spirits trapped within. The kind ghost appeared almost immediately, materializing in front of Clara as if he had been waiting for her all along. His form was more defined this time, his features clearer in the dim candlelight. He looked younger than Clara remembered, with soft brown eyes that held an eternal sadness. But there was something new in his expression, a sense of urgency, a warning. "You came back," he whispered, though it was less a statement and more a plea. "I had to," Clara replied, her voice shaking despite her attempt at courage. "There's something you're not telling me. I need to know why the spirits are here. Why you're here." The ghost glanced behind him, his translucent form flickering, as though a dark force was tugging at his essence. "They're waking," he said softly, his voice tinged with fear. "The cruel ones, they sense you." Clara tightened her grip on the candle, its weak flame barely enough to pierce the oppressive darkness that surrounded them. "Why do they hate the living so much? What happened here?" The kind ghost floated closer to her, his cold presence causing the hairs on the back of her neck to rise. "There was a massacre," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Long ago. The manor, it was once a place of refuge, but something terrible happened here. We were betrayed, trapped inside, and burned alive." Clara's heart sank. The weight of the house's tragic history pressed down on her, but she could feel there was more to the story. "Who betrayed you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The kind ghost looked away, his form wavering as though the memory was too painful to recall. "The master of the house," he said finally. "He was a man of dark magic, a collector of souls. He lured us here, families, children, and when the night came, he performed a ritual, a sacrifice. He thought by trapping our spirits, he would gain eternal life." Clara shivered, a deep dread settling into her bones. The cruel spirits weren't merely vengeful, they were victims of something far more sinister. "And you?" Clara asked, her voice small. "Why are you different?" The ghost hesitated. "Not all of us succumbed to the darkness," he said. "Some of us tried to protect the others, to stop him. But we failed. In death, our souls were bound to this place, split between rage and sorrow. I couldn't save them, but I tried." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the halls, shaking the very foundations of the manor. Clara's candle flickered dangerously, and the air grew colder still. The kind ghost's face twisted in fear. "They're coming," he said, backing away. "The others, they won't stop until they've taken you, too. You must leave now." Clara stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. But before she could run, a sharp, icy wind whipped through the room, snuffing out her candle. Darkness consumed her. In the silence that followed, Clara could hear them, the cruel spirits approaching. Their whispers were no longer soft, they were a cacophony of rage and pain, rising like a storm. Shapes began to form in the darkness, twisted figures, with hollow eyes and mouths contorted in silent screams. One of them, a tall, gaunt figure with blackened skin and burning eyes, lunged at Clara. She stumbled backward, her back hitting the wall as the ghost's icy fingers brushed her face. A deep chill settled into her skin, freezing her from the inside out. Suddenly, the kind ghost appeared again, placing himself between Clara and the cruel spirit. He held out his hands, and a faint light emanated from his form. pushing the dark entity back. "You won't have her," the kind ghost shouted, his voice stronger than before. The cruel spirit hissed in fury, retreating into the shadows, but not without a final warning. "She will never escape," it rasped. "The Master's curse binds us all, and now it binds her too." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. The kind ghost turned to her, his expression filled with sorrow. "You've been marked," he said quietly. "The moment you stepped into this house, you became part of the curse. It will follow you, even if you leave. The Master's power is not confined to these walls. He's still out there, somewhere, waiting for the right moment to rise again." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "Then how do I break it?" The ghost shook his head. "I don't know, but there is a way. Hidden somewhere within the manor is the Master's ledger book of names, of the souls he's claimed. If you can find it, you may be able to sever his hold over us. But be warned, finding it may awaken something far worse." Clara nodded, determination settling into her chest. She had come too far to turn back now. "I'll find it," she said. "I'll free you?" The ghost's form flickered again, his energy waning. "Hurry," he whispered. "Time is running out." With that, he faded into the shadows, leaving Clara alone in the dark once more. But she wasn't truly alone. She could hear them whispers, footsteps, the soft scraping of something far more sinister stirring within the house. Clara took a deep breath and steadied herself. The cruel spirits were watching her, waiting for her next move, and somewhere in the depths of the manor, the Master's cursed legacy waited to be uncovered. But Clara knew one thing for certain. This was far from over. Clara stood in the oppressive darkness of Hallowgate Manor, the whispers of the cruel spirits encircling her like a growing storm. She had come too far to turn back now, but the weight of the Master's curse pressed heavily on her soul. Yet she clung to the hope that somewhere, in this twisted place, there was still a way to break the chains that bound the spirits and herself. She steeled herself and began her search for the Master's ledger, the book of names the kind ghost had spoken of. The manor seemed more alive now, as if it sensed her purpose, its walls pulsing with dark energy. Every shadow seemed to move, every corner hiding something unseen. But Clara pressed forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She made her way through the crumbling corridors and up the grand staircase to the Master's study. It was a room of dark wood and faded velvet, and though decayed, it held an air of dark elegance. On the far side of the room sat a large, weathered desk, and there, atop it, lay a blackened, leather-bound book to ledger. Clara approached it cautiously. The air around the book felt thick with malevolence, as if it radiated the very curse that had plagued the manor for centuries. Her hands shook as she opened the cover. Inside, she saw the names, thousands of them, scrawled in spidery handwriting. These were the souls the Master had claimed, their fates sealed by his dark magic. As Clara skimmed the pages, her eyes landed on the name of the kind ghost, Thomas Galloway. She gently traced her fingers over the ink, feeling the weight of his sorrow. Beneath his name were others, the cruel spirits, those consumed by their rage and torment. But there was something else, a final page, untouched by age or decay. Written in fresh ink was Clara's own name. A chill shot through her body, but before she could react, a powerful force gripped her. The air in the room thickened, and the floorboards beneath her feet groaned as if the house itself was waking up. A dark presence filled the room, and from the shadows, the Master himself emerged, a tall figure cloaked in darkness, his face a mask of pure evil. "You thought you could escape my curse." The Master sneered, his voice like cold iron. "You are mine now, just like the others." Clara felt the Master's power pulling her in, her limbs growing heavy as her soul fought to remain anchored to her body. But she didn't give in to fear. With all her strength, she reached for the ledger and, with trembling hands, began tearing the pages from the book. The Master's eyes widened in fury. "No," he roared, lunging toward her. But it was too late. As Clara ripped each page from the ledger, the air around her seemed to shift. The dark energy that had filled the house began to dissipate, and the cruel spirit's anguished screams turned into whispers and then silence. The manor itself shuddered, as if releasing a breath it had held for centuries. The Master let out a terrible scream. his form beginning to disintegrate as the curse unraveled. "You will never be free," he hissed, but his voice grew weaker, and his body faded into dust, scattering into the shadows. The room grew still. The heavy weight that had pressed down on Clara's chest lifted, and for the first time, she could breathe freely. She looked around, expecting the shadows to lunge at her once more, but they were gone. The darkness had retreated. As Clara stood there, catching her breath, the kind ghost, Thomas, appeared beside her. He was more solid now, his form no longer flickering and weak. His face, though still sad, held a gentle smile. "You did it," he said softly. "The curse is broken. The souls are free." Clara looked into his eyes, feeling a warmth that hadn't been there before. "And you?" she asked. "Are you free too?" Thomas nodded, though a hint of sadness lingered in his gaze. "Yes, I can move on now. My soul is no longer bound to this place." He reached out, touching her hand one last time. "Thank you, Clara. You've given us peace. You've given me peace." Tears welled in Clara's eyes as she watched Thomas begin to fade. "Will I ever see you again?" she asked. Thomas smiled, his form shimmering in the dim light. "Perhaps, in another life. But until then, live well. You've earned it." And with that, he was gone, a soft glow left in his wake, lingering for just a moment before disappearing into the ether. The manor, once a place of torment and darkness, now felt empty, peaceful, even. The air was no longer heavy with malevolence, and the whispers had vanished. Clara stood in the quiet room, feeling a profound sense of relief wash over her. As she stepped outside into the cool night, the stars twinkling above, Clara took a deep breath. The weight of the curse had been lifted, not just from the manor, but from her own soul. She was free. For the first time in weeks, she felt hope. The spirits of Hallowgate Manor were at rest, and though she had faced the darkest of forces, she had emerged victorious. Clara walked away from the manor, leaving behind its dark history and stepping into a new dawn, one filled with light, life, and peace. The end.